ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hi, I'm Sam Hawley, coming to you from Gadigal Land. This is ABC News Daily. Ben Roberts-Smith was a war hero, Australia's most decorated soldier receiving a Victoria Cross. Now, a court's found in a civil defamation case that newspaper reports that he's a war criminal and murderer are true. The former SAS soldier took defamation action against 3 newspapers, the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Canberra Times, after they stated he was involved in the unlawful killing and assault of unarmed prisoners in Afghanistan. Today, defamation expert Jason Bosland on the federal court's ruling and its wider implications.
Today, a federal court judge dismisses the defamation case brought by former soldier Ben Roberts-Smith.
Decorated war soldier Ben Roberts-Smith's defamation case has been dismissed by a federal court judge.
Jason, this is a huge case and it's a big moment for the media, for defamation law in this country, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can't think of a defamation case in recent history which has been so significant.
The judgment is a vindication for journalists Nick McKenzie and Chris Masters, who began reporting this difficult and complicated story more than 7 years ago.
And today is a day of justice. It's a day of justice for those brave men of the SAS who stood up and told the truth about who Ben Roberts-Smith is, a war criminal, a bully and a liar.
It's not just the actual legal case that's significant here, it's the broader implications of it, I think. So it really is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it lasted for 5 years, more than 100 court days, so it was incredibly lengthy as well. And I want to unpack with you soon the details of this ruling because in essence it finds that reports in The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Canberra Times that Ben Roberts-Smith committed war crimes in Afghanistan are substantially true. But to get a better understanding of the significance of that, I think it's good just to look back at who Ben Roberts-Smith is because he was a big deal. He was a hero.
Oh, absolutely. So he served in Afghanistan. He was, considered to be a real war hero, received, the Victoria Cross and other significant awards.
Mm-hmm. To be presented the Victoria Cross for Australia, Corporal Benjamin Roberts-Smith.
He did not fail when mateship and duty called. And though it might easily have cost him his life, he was fully prepared to give it.
I just looked across, saw my mates getting ripped up, and just decided to move forward.
Let's now then, Jason, look at this ruling and at the articles that were printed, because while Ben Roberts-Smith was seen as a war hero, that all started to unravel in 2018 when these series of news articles began to be printed. So let's have a look at what the allegations were in those news articles.
Sure. So the allegations in the series of articles that were published, there were 6 articles in total, revolved around 3 categories. Mm-hmm. The first category being war crimes, including the fact that he was involved in the murder of unarmed and defenceless civilians, Afghan civilians, while serving in Afghanistan, or at least that he was complicit in such conduct.
Mr. Roberts-Smith says one of the articles is defamatory because it claims in 2012 that he murdered an unarmed Afghan civilian by kicking...
And there were other allegations around that he breached moral and legal rules of military engagement while serving as well. So that was sort of a broader allegation that was made. And then there was a second category of allegations which revolved around bullying and his behaviour while serving, particularly around his behaviour with his colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Witnesses will be alleging in court in the coming days that Ben Roberts-Smith is a serious bully.
And then finally there were allegations of domestic violence.
So, I mean, these are serious allegations. One of them was that Ben Roberts-Smith kicked an unarmed and handcuffed Afghan villager off a cliff in September 2012 and then ordered another soldier to shoot him.
In the matters, Ben Roberts-Smith and the Age Company...
The applicant, while a member of the SASR, murdered an unarmed and defenceless Afghan civilian by kicking him off a cliff and procuring the soldiers under his command to shoot him. Imputation 1.
When we go to that moral issue that he took a prosthetic leg of someone who he had killed in Afghanistan.
Is so callous and inhumane that he took the prosthetic leg back to Australia and encouraged his soldiers to use it as a novelty beer-drinking vessel. Imputation 6.
So now let's look, Jason, at what the judge has found. What has he said?
Well, interestingly, what the judge had to rule on was whether or not those imputations could be defended by a defence, and in particular the defence pleaded by, which was mostly relied upon by the media, which was the defence of truth.
Because this is a defamation case. That's important to remember. It's a civil case, not a criminal case.
That's right. So in a defamation case, the way it works is that the plaintiff puts in their statement of claim what they allege the publication means, and then it really turns to the defendant in the case to rely upon a defence. And in this case, the defence of truth has been relied upon. Now, as you say, it's not a criminal case, it's a civil case. So when we're talking about proving any matter in a civil case, it's on the balance of probabilities. However, when it comes to allegations of criminality and serious misconduct, burden of establishing that something has been proven to be true on the balance of probabilities is much higher. So it doesn't meet the criminal standard of beyond reasonable doubt. Yes. It's not tantamount to that. But it certainly isn't the same as, you're having to prove the fact that someone didn't put their bins out on a Tuesday night or something relatively, trivial in comparison. So I think it is extremely significant that the judge here, even though it's a civil case, has found that Ben Roberts-Smith has engaged in this conduct, in criminal conduct, and not just relatively minor criminal conduct. We're talking about murder here. That's an extraordinary finding, I think.
I am satisfied that the respondents have made out a defence of truth. In light of my conclusions, each proceeding must be dismissed.
Yeah, so he's found that the claims made in the newspaper articles were substantially true.
Yes, most of them. Yes, that's right. Now, I haven't read the judgment. The judgment isn't available yet. So, I can't give you sort of particulars as to why he found that those imputations have been proven true. And I'd be really interested to find out and read about the evidence that was relied upon to reach those conclusions.
Okay, but he didn't find that all of the allegations raised by the newspaper were substantially true. So what did he find in other cases?
The ones that I picked up were the allegations of domestic violence, that those weren't proven to be true.
With respect to the alleged act of domestic violence and imputations 7 and 8, I am not satisfied that person 17's evidence is sufficiently reliable to form the basis of a finding that the assault occurred and that imputations...
However, there was a defence to those imputations, and that was the contextual truth defence.
What is that?
No, yeah, it's a bit tricky, but the contextual truth defence essentially is a defence whereby if you as a defendant can point to really serious matters in a publication which are true and they affect the reputation of someone, you are excused from proving the truth of relatively minor allegations if those minor allegations wouldn't further harm the reputation of the person in light of what you have proven to be true. So the fact that here we've got, allegations of of serious criminality, murder, misconduct, etc., because those imputations were able to be proven true, the media were excused from having to prove the truth of the domestic violence allegations because they didn't further harm Ben Roberts-Smith's reputation.
As you mentioned, you haven't read the full judgment. That's because it actually hasn't been released. Why is that? Just explain that.
So the plan was that there would be an open judgment that was released to the public. And there was also meant to be a closed judgment. So the closed judgment contained information and evidence which Justice Bazanko thought would be dangerous in terms of its release, in terms of national security. So it was national security concerns there. And that's not all that unusual. What is unusual is that the Commonwealth here intervened and sought a suppression order preventing the publication of the open judgment, the judgment which was meant to be made available to the public, until Monday, 2:00 on Monday, in order for them to be able to sit down and work out whether or not there's any national security information which might be contained in that judgment that shouldn't be made available to the public.
Okay, so as you say, that's quite unusual. The journalists who wrote these articles, Nick Mackenzie and Chris Masters, they spoke outside the court after the summary of the judgment was released.
Today is a day of some small justice for the Afghan victims of Ben Robert-Smith. Ali Jan was the man kicked off the cliff.
It's a huge win for the papers, a huge win for the journalists, and it's a case with huge costs associated, something like $25 million to $35 million in costs. So who's going to pay those?
Well, that's a good question. So there will be a costs hearing whereby the parties will put arguments as to how the cost should be apportioned. And Justice Pisanko will have to rule on that. Now, ordinarily in a civil case, the costs follow the event so that whoever loses pays the costs. But it's hard to say. It's hard to say without sort of knowing more.
Okay, and Ben Robert-Smith now has 42 days to lodge an appeal. What comes next for him, do you think?
Oh, good question. Look, I suspect there will be an appeal. I think that will probably happen. You know, that would drag this out for another 2 years.
Oh, gosh.
So who knows? The other sort of dimension to this is you've got, a judge of a federal court, very well-respected judge, making findings that Ben Robert-Smith has done these things, has committed these war crimes. He's found it to the civil standard of proof. It would be very odd, I would have thought, if this is just left hanging, if there was no further action taken. So who knows?
Okay, so this is certainly, though, Jason, a win for public interest journalism.
It is a win for public interest journalism. It also demonstrates, I suppose, the immense burden of public interest journalism, actually. The journalists here are very well-respected journalists, and they have been dragged through this process, this extremely lengthy and costly process. And I think that cost really relates to the fact that we don't have robust protections for journalists and media organisations when it comes to defamation. It really reveals, I suppose, the costs and the risks involved in undertaking this type of work and this really important public interest work.
I think it's a relief for the media, frankly. We're so often on our knees. It often feels so hard to even do ordinary work, let alone work as difficult as this. So this judgment comes as a great relief.
Associate Professor Jason Bosland is the Director of the Centre for Media and Communications Law at the Melbourne Law School. Ben Robert-Smith is currently under investigation by the Brereton Inquiry into allegations of war crimes by ADF Special Forces. This episode was produced by Veronica App, Flint Duxfield and Sam Dunn, who also did the mix. Our supervising producer is Stephen Smiley. Over the weekend, catch This Week with David Lipson. He'll be looking further into the Ben Robert-Smith ruling. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening.
Subscribe to listen to more free podcasts or download the ABC Listen app and stream ad-free.